Hi, I'm his Big Bear Ron. In this video, I'm going to read a little bit out of a book titled Sex in History, written by Reay Tannahill. I first read this book some 20 years ago, and this writer, in my opinion, has a very keen sense of humor, a very keen sense of critique. She has obviously done her homework. She has done an extensive literary review on the matter, and her writing is just a pleasure to read. Very respectful, but not in a very boring, monotone sort of way. I think if you would find this book, add it to your collection, I think you will find it a joy to read. I have gone back to this book time and time and time again because she just has a way of saying things that, just can't be beat. But anyway, I'm going to read a few excerpts from this book, and hopefully that will give you some inspiration to want to read it and critique it for yourself. Okay, my first reading is going to come from the chapter called, or part 2 of the book called The Near East, Egypt, and Europe, 3000 BC through AD 1100, and from a section called Contraception. I will go ahead and tell you I stumble on some of the words here, but I don't think it'll take away from the point, whatever. But imagine 3000 BC and contraceptions all in the same sentence. Anyway, here goes. In the course of time, the command to be fruitful and multiply lost some of its force. Non-productive sex in the forms in which it had been denounced from Sinai remained anathema. But when the Jews were compelled to scatter into new lands, large families became a liability, and the idea of birth limitations seemed increasingly attractive. By this time, 300 years before the Christian era, contraceptive techniques had a long and erratic history. Not until the end of the 17th century AD were scientists to discover that seminal fluid was not just a liquid, but a suspension medium for millions of individual sperm, and it was more than another 200 years before they learned that a single one of these was all that was needed to accomplish fertilization. Until then, those who advocated or practiced contraception had not been aware of the scale of the challenge. Basically, however, even the early Egyptians had the right ideas. Their object was to prevent the seminal fluid from entering the womb, either by mopping it up before it reached there, by trapping it in a spongy or absorbent fabric inserted in the vagina, or by blocking off the cervical opening that connects the vagina with the womb. In the prescriptions that survive from dynastic times, it is not always clear which method is intended, some of the ingredients still not having been identified. The Khem Papyrus, which includes the first such recipes, suggest mixing crocodile dung with a paste of, and this word is spelled A-U-Y-T. I'm going to take a chance and pronounce it oit, and inserting the result in the vagina, rather like a tampon. Other ideas were to use a glutinous compound of honey and natron, that is sodium carbonate, or a preparation of oit gum. Initial revulsion apart, and in fact the contraceptive recipes are quite fragrant in composition, with most of the Egyptian pharomacopoeia. Did they work? No one is very sure, especially since early chemistry, like early cookery, never troubled to list quantities, so that it is difficult to judge the finished texture. The crocodile dung prescription may, for example, have had an absorbent texture, in which case it would be used in the vagina to soak up seminal fluid. More compacted, it would do as a cervical plug, perhaps even having enough resilience to expand and contract with the vaginal and uterine muscles, which would give it increased effectiveness. 300 years after the Can Papyrus, the Papyrus Ebers suggested soaking a pad of lint in a mixture of acacia tips and honey and using it to block the opening into the uterus. It may be noted that none of the surviving recommendations for barrier devices, either at this time or later, explains how they are to be maneuvered into position. It was not something that could be achieved with the fingers, which are far too short. The physician or the woman herself must have used some kind of applicator, or the plug may have been quite large, filling the whole rear projection of the vagina, as well as the part round the opening into the uterus. In this case, a lint base would certainly be preferable to one of degradable crocodile dung for ease of removal as well as insertion. Contraception appeared essentially as a mechanical challenge, but Egypt was the home of chemical ingenuity, and Egyptian physicians may well have recognized, though without knowing why, that certain chemical influences improved the effect of mechanical contraceptives. Scientists today, well informed not only about the existence of sperm, but about their mobility and sensitivity to various substances, are aware that oily or gluey media reduce the sperm's mobility, that acidity helps to discourage fertilization, that lactic acid will stop a sperm dead in its tracks, and that salt is also an excellent spermicide. In the Egyptian recipes, the honey and oat gum must certainly have slowed the sperm down. More interestingly, acacia tips, by a natural process, produce lactic acid, which is the active ingredient still favored in most spermicidal creams and jellies today. Modern authorities, however, suspect that the Egyptians would have done better to use elephant rather than crocodile dung, the latter being alkaline and therefore favorable to sperm survival. Elephant dung is mildly acid, and it was still being recommended for contraceptives in the Islamic world as late as the 13th century. Incidentally, Reay Tannahill has written another book called Food in History. I don't own a copy of that book, but I did borrow it once from a library, and it is equally as entertaining to read. Anyway, check out Reay Tannahill, Sex in History, and in my next video, I will read another excerpt from this book. Thanks for watching.